In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the war in the Pacific Theater and how the United States came to defeat Japan. Right after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, taking us out of the fight for a while, the Japanese quickly moved into the Philippines, overwhelmed the U.S. soldiers that were stationed in the Philippines, and took control of the Philippine Islands. They marched, you see on the bottom photo here, soldiers and American civilians to prisoner of war camps, and Japan was particularly brutal in its treatment of prisoners of war and of the colonies it took over in general. The turning point battle in the Pacific was only about 6 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and it was the Battle of Midway, a very small island that you see here. The reason this was such an important battle was that we managed with our victory here to destroy Japan's ability to launch offensive operations, so that it wasn't that much of a concern Hawaii being attacked or the west coast of the United States being attacked. You're actually looking down in this photo from a plane that's flying in the air. You can see it's largely an air battle. That's the USS Yorktown that's getting bombed. There's a map of the island itself. You can see here the Yorktown being hit. Let me see if I can make this a little bit larger. This map shows the extent of Japanese control in the Pacific Ocean. You can see it's quite extensive, and there are thousands of islands in the Pacific Ocean, many of which Japan had fortified to prevent the United States from invading the home islands of Japan, which I'm circling for you here. So the question became how the United States was going to go about getting through this defensive fortress that Japan had set up for itself. And the short answer to this was something called island hopping. You can see here in late 1943, the United States is going to make its way very slowly this way, and at the same time we're going to come up in the southern route with the help of the Australians to some extent to come and get Japan from the south. Both are going to end up at Okinawa, which you can see here is basically a 3-month-long battle. This process was known as island hopping. Instead of going after every single island the Japanese had under their control, we would focus on one, take it, use it as a staging area, base of operations, leapfrog over several other islands, and take another Japanese-held island slightly closer to Japan. This was a slow process, resulted in a lot of casualties because you're looking at mini D-Day invasions of each island that we decided to take. And as I pointed out, the Japanese had fortified these islands. You're looking there at what was known as a pillbox, and the Japanese would be able to shoot at soldiers coming ashore while they themselves were well protected in that cement bunker from attack. The defense that was used against the pillbox was the flamethrower, which meant that you had to get close enough to one of those pillbox windows to then shoot flames inside and burn up the soldiers inside. As the war went on, Japan had more difficulty making bombs and whatnot for the planes, so they ended up using pilots that would go on suicide missions using the planes themselves as a flying bomb to fly into U.S. battleships and aircraft carriers. These were known as kamikaze pilots. Stepping aside from the battles themselves, the Manhattan Project was started in 1942, and this was the project to develop the atomic bomb. The scientists you can see that were involved in its development are up on the left. The scientists operated mainly in Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico that I'm circling here, but you can see from this map there were a number of other sites in the United States that were involved in the production of the atomic bomb. President Roosevelt is going to run for re-election, his third re-election, or his fourth term as president in 1944, and this time he's going to pick Harry Truman to run as his vice presidential running mate. They'll win and be sworn in January of 1945, and Roosevelt is going to die in April of 1945, making Harry Truman president. When Truman was made president, at that point he was made aware of the Manhattan Project. The reason the atomic bomb wasn't used in Germany is, you can see here, it wasn't ready until August 2nd, and Germany had surrendered on May 8th of 1945. So with it being available to use, Harry Truman was meeting in Potsdam, Germany, with Stalin and Churchill, discussing post-war issues discussing post-war Germany, made them aware that he had the atomic bomb, and at the same time announced to Japan that we had this new ultimate weapon of mass destruction and that Japan needed to surrender, or else we were going to use it. This came after a decision on Truman's part whether or not to actually use such a weapon of mass destruction that would kill so many civilian lives. But given that the military said that if we invaded Japan conventionally, the war would take up to about another year, and roughly about 1 million additional lives would be lost, many of them American lives, Truman decided to use the atomic bomb in an effort to actually save lives. I know that sounds very strange, given looking at the devastation that one bomb dropped, killing 110,000 people basically immediately. But the thought was we would drop the one and Japan would surrender. But Japan didn't surrender, which led us to drop a second one on Nagasaki. Both Hiroshima and Nagasaki were cities with important military installations, which is why they were chosen. After this, Japan did surrender, fearing we had more. As it turned out, we didn't really have any more. They didn't know that. And here we see the surrender taking place on the USS Missouri. This happens August 14th, 1945. This is known as VJ Day, or Victory in Japan, and here we see the celebrations taking place in Times Square. So here to sum up then, the Battle of Midway was the crucial battle in the Pacific because it ended Japan's offensive operations. Our strategy to reach Japan was known as island hopping, where we would capture an island and then leapfrog over several others to get to another island. And the atomic bomb was used by Truman to end the war faster with fewer lives lost. And that brings us to a conclusion of the war, and the war in the Pacific specifically, and World War II.